SARChI Chair in South African Art and Visual Culture and the Department of Visual Art at the University of Johannesburg are so pleased to welcome Alan Laing to have a conversation with us this evening about his art practice following the exhibition of distinguished alumni that was held earlier in 2022 at the Fada Gallery. Alan was awarded UJ's Chancellor's Medal in 2018 and also in 2018 the Ampersand Foundation Fellowship in New York. These are only two of the accolades and residencies of his career thus far. He is a multidisciplinary artist whose creative practice combines performance, video, and traditional woodmaking techniques. If I may quote you, Alan, he says, "As a rational global white South African, I experience a lack of mystical elements in my life. Through my art, I discover what I have lost as a child when fantasy and hope were still alive. Important to my work are narrative, fantasy, and absurdity. Playfulness makes problems malleable." So thank you so much, Alan, for coming this evening. I'd like to hand over to you, if that's good. We'll take questions for Alan and discussion points at the end, but for now he has prepared a talk for us about his work.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Irene. Yeah, I think it's a good summary, a good introduction. Thanks. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about my work that I've made in the last couple of years, just a selection of that work. There's three sort of main themes that I thought would be interesting. But just before I begin, thank you everyone for being here. I appreciate that you have taken an interest in being here, and thank you to Brenda and UJ and the SARChI chair and so on for the opportunity, because I think it's lovely to be invited to just talk about my work a little bit. So I'm assuming everyone can see my presentation, which says Meditations on Xylophory, which I'm not sure how to pronounce. It's a word that I found in one of Willem Boshoff's most recent dictionaries, the Ono Dictionary. And this title probably makes no sense because I only encountered this word for the first time a couple of weeks ago when I was paging through his dictionary, but it has been carefully chosen. So the subtitle as well, The Simple Joy of Manual Labor, Imagination and Play. That's in a sense what I'm going to be focusing on in this particular talk, in addition to those things that Irene discussed, narrative, fantasy, absurdity, humor, and so on. Yeah, so just to define that funny word, which most people have probably never seen, xylophory apparently just means carrying wood. So I find it really strange that someone out there in the world took these two Greek roots and put them together to create this English word, xylophory, to describe this very particular activity of carrying wood. But I get the idea that particularly it was a religious writer who was writing about Hebrew traditions, who felt the need to coin this word. And we can see from the ancient scholar Josephus, he speaks about the festival of xylophory, upon which the custom was for everyone to bring wood for the altar, that there might never be a want of fuel for that fire which was unquenchable and always burning. And when I encountered this word in Willem Boshoff's dictionary, the reason why it appealed to me is its simplicity, because for the last, I would say, at least 8 years, I've been working almost exclusively with wood as a medium. So whatever it is that occurs to me, whatever idea I want to express, I've to some extent limited myself and challenged myself to always express that idea and communicate that idea in some way using wood. And there's a number of reasons for this. And the idea of xylophory as the idea of just carrying wood, picking up and carrying wood at its most basic, appeals to me most strongly. So I've been told by people, or I know this sort of expectation from the marketing side of art, is that you should be able to summarize what it is you do with this very sexy elevator pitch, or this high impact sentence that sums up what you do, or from an academic point of view, maybe you should be able to support what you do with some kind of theory, which both of those are incredibly valuable. And I hope one day I'll be able to do one of those two things. But for me, the main emphasis is just this idea that if you touch wood, if you pick up wood, and if you start working with wood, it supplies you with so much. It supplies you with what you're looking for. It guides you in terms of developing your concept. At least in my personal experience, that's been the case. And also just looking again at the idea of meditations on xylophory. So meditations on carrying wood. I feel that a lot of what happens in my practice comes from me sitting quietly or sitting noisily, whatever the case may be, but sitting with the wood and surrounding myself with wood, being present amongst wood. For me personally, that's been a large part of how I've made my art. And then also, as I've said in the subtitle, manual labor, imagination, and play. When I sit with wood, then I begin to be busy with my hands, and I start to assemble things. I start to think of solutions, ways that the wood can come together. And that's where my whole practice evolves from. So in the sort of three main themes that I'll be talking of, I will delve into much more detail about what motivated me in each of those cases. But I feel the foundation of everything is this idea of xylophory. And just some other things that I like about this, the fact that this word comes from antiquity, is that in the Israeli or Hebrew tradition, not that I'm an expert at all, but based on my limited reading, the different tribes of Israel were required to bring different kinds of sacrifices to the temple of God, which I'm assuming would be things like grain or wine or oil or meat of some kind. But the one sacrifice that everyone was expected to bring was this sacrifice of bringing wood for the altar. So what's so beautiful about that is that wood is the lowest common denominator. It's by no means elitist. It's by no means exclusive or in any way preventing anyone from participating, which I thought was quite lovely. If we compare it with other artistic media, such as, even oil paint, even expensive charcoal and pastels, bronze and so on, those media have some potential attachments of being elitist or being reserved for only certain kinds of masters or whatever the case may be. But for me, wood is something that humans have always been using and humans continue to use to solve various problems. And that's part of why it appeals to me so much. And also what I liked about this idea of the sacrifice of burning things on an altar, on a wood fire, but even the idea of worshiping in a grove, or having these sacred poles or totems. There's for me a certain link between spirituality in humans and the use of wood, which I also thought is quite nice. It's just a nice sort of association that I had with that. And the last thing that I really love about wood, if we think about Marx talking about the way that we are alienated from our labor, we're alienated from society because everything's been segmented, everything's been automated, everything has been reduced to money. What I love about humans' interaction with wood is that it's very often a way for people to reconnect with their own labor, to reconnect with making something from start to finish, especially if you go to the extent that I do, where I only, or not only, but very much almost only use wood that I pick up at the side of the road. I feel that I sort of go through a journey with all of the wood. So all of those things were nice for me to think about when it came to this idea of xylophory that I discovered recently. So in the rest of this talk, I'm going to talk about three main sort of bodies of work. I'm not exactly sure how to define them. First, I'll talk about what I've called performed artworks, because performance art, according to, let's say, Fluxus or, those conceptual artists of the 80s, the performance itself was the artwork, and the only record left behind might have been a video or a photo, but there wouldn't necessarily have been objects. Those wouldn't have been necessary. Whereas I've called mine performed artworks because the making of the object and performing with the object for me is as important as the performance. So I don't only want to focus on the interaction between, viewers or members of the public and myself. I absolutely put a lot of thought and effort into the object itself. So these 3 performed artworks, as you can see, are slightly older because essentially in 2019, I was working on this body of work called Machines in the Garden. And then since COVID happened, I haven't had the motivation or the drive to do another performance yet. So hopefully I'll be doing another performance soon. So I think those are quite interesting to talk about. And for the first 2, I'll be playing a 4-minute video in each case, which I hope is not too long. And then for the last one, I'll play the video, but without sound, and I'll just talk over it. And all 3 of those artworks have to do with my interactions with strangers most of the time. I create a certain kind of circumstance or situation, and I immerse myself in that. And then I allow things to unfold without too much trying to control it or plan it. Machines in the Garden is a body of work which I dealt with my own cell phone addiction. And I haven't dealt with it in the sense that it's been resolved. I'm still totally addicted to my cell phone, especially things like Instagram or stupid meme sites or YouTube. But those artworks are expressions or lamentations of me looking at my life and thinking, why am I so addicted to this thing which doesn't, I feel, add a lot of value to my life? And then the last work, Elemental Inoculation, it's not really incredibly driven by concept. It is a commission that I'm doing for a company. But what's fantastic about the client is they didn't give me any sort of prescriptions or proscriptions. They have given me the opportunity to create what in my case will be my magnum opus thus far. It will be the biggest, most involved, complex work that I've made thus far. And it's something that I started working on in April last year, and I'm not yet finished with, just to illustrate how much of a labor it is and continues to be. So I thought that would just be interesting to share from more of a formal or a crafts personship kind of viewpoint. The first artwork that I'd like to discuss is the one called Advocate of Nature. And before I begin talking about it, I'd like to play this video. So once the video starts, if you could just indicate in the chat that the audio is working, then I know I can just play it and yeah, you can have a look. The audio might take a moment just to begin.
This is very impressive.
Thanks,
very capturing.
Good, yeah.
So basically, you are trying to say that you are an advocate of nature while picking and collecting nature. Actually, you are a value-free technician. So here I see it, a specimen of a teacher here, to say that out of this abstract here, actually me, I'm a person who defines things in many different ways. Because I'll be looking at the root of such works. Yeah. You understand? Simplicity is a vital key. You understand?
Yeah.
It takes simple tools and simple people to abstract extraordinary capabilities and extraordinary results. You understand?
Yeah.
An artist is not propelled by matter. Remember, an artist is a capturer. He is a projector, one who projects a thing in the spirit and bring it to pass in the physical. Artists, you possess a certain excellence in your nature because you're just like your father, the creator. He's always wearing a dust coat written creator. You understand? You know why? Every man, whatever he is given, because your true identity is not defined by yourself. You understand? Take everything from a man. That does not mean that a man will remain not a man. You can take everything from a man, but you remain a man. Will you turn into a giraffe just because you have taken everything? A man remains a man. And a man is not defined by what he eats or where he is or what he's doing. A man is defined by what he has come to do. Remember, we have not come to do the right thing or the wrong thing. We have to come to do what must be done, the fulfillment.
Cheers.
Power, comrade.
I'll see you around.
Let's ignite such excellence.
Amen. This, it's a saw.
Okay, so I hope the audio is a bit raw and jarring. So I hope it wasn't too traumatic to listen to that. So this is my artwork called Advocate of Nature, and I'll just explain what was going on there. I was driving in my car to my studio, and I saw a tree lying next to the road, on sort of a heap of branches and garden refuse. This bit of tree trunk, which I then stopped my car, loaded it on the back of my car, drove to my studio. And I thought to myself, would I have taken that tree if I had to carry it to my studio? I'm lucky to have a car. I'm privileged to be able to just, pick things up with my car and make it much easier to carry. And then it was a very, very simple germ, or a very simple kernel, which ignited this idea. And I just thought, what would happen if I had to push this tree? And of course, in South Africa, we think of the recyclers who push those massive heavy trolleys. It's incredibly dangerous, hard work, which pays very little. I'm always, absolutely surprised by their industriousness and their willingness to work so hard. So I thought, what if I put wheels on this tree and I just push it across the whole of Pretoria? And initially I thought, I want to push it from the east where the sun rises, and then I want to push it all the way to the west where the sun sets. But that turned out, where if I take Tshwane, I think the distance comes close to 100 kilometers. And if I just take the Pretoria, urban area, that would be about 50 kilometers. So eventually I settled on pushing the tree trunk from my studio, which happens to be on the R104, which was called Church Street. It's now called a variety of names, including Stanza Bopape, Pretoria Road, Bronkhorstspruit Road. And that R104 goes directly from my studio all the way to Church Square. So I thought that's about 15 kilometers. And I'd compromise, because that seemed maybe doable in a single day, to push it 15 kilometers as opposed to 100. And then I thought, I've got this naked tree trunk, and what I do is I collect wood. So let me push this tree trunk down the road, and I'll pick up bits of wood that I encounter, and then those will grow into the branches of the tree. But as I said, the initial idea was quite simple. It was quite uninvolved. I just wanted to see what would happen if I embarked on this process. And the reason why I included that one guy's entire monologue is because that to me was such a beautiful moment. It was more or less halfway through my journey. This stranger approached me, and he just felt this need to express some kind of excitement and some kind of insights about the work that he saw. And the one of the first things he said is, you're an advocate of nature, which to me was amazingly poignant, because to some extent I definitely understand the importance of ecology, of protecting our planet. It's definitely something very close to my heart. And in the process of pushing this tree trunk for 15 kilometers down the road, the R104 it's an industrial road. It's sort of a main artery. So you've got lots of big buses, lots of trucks, lots of taxis, lots of cargo vehicles. The road isn't beautiful by any description. There aren't often sidewalks for people to safely walk along. And the sort of destruction caused by humankind on the environment is particularly felt when you walk along that road. So the fact that this guy wanted to tell me that he thought I'm an advocate of nature, and he was, sort of inspired by what he saw me doing, to me, that was incredibly moving. And then just beyond that, once again, as middle-class people in South Africa, the public transport system isn't great. So if you have the privilege of driving around in a car, it's not often that you walk or use public transport. So as a middle-class person moving through South Africa, you're quite disconnected from people. You go from your home into the next bubble, which could be your workplace, and from there you go to the next bubble, which could be a gym or a mall, and you're always insulated in these little, bubbles of consumerism where you've essentially bought your way in. But in pushing this trunk down the road, so many people came and engaged with me and talked to me, and that was also beautiful. So on a sort of soppy way, as this tree was growing, as I was adding bits of wood to the trunk, there were also experiences and stories being added to me as a person. And there was even this one moment in the video, I don't know if anyone noticed it, but this one stranger sort of asks me what I've got there, and it's an incredibly sharp saw. It's a Japanese saw. It's a dangerous thing, and he sort of pulls it from my hand with a bit of a sort of threatening. He sort of plucked it from my hand without my permission. But I just stood there, and I couldn't drop this tree trunk because that would ruin my artwork. And I just stood there, and then he sort of had a chat with me, and he got his friends to take some photos of him with the saw, and then he put it back. So it's these little moments that I felt one otherwise might have missed, which the silly idea of me trying to push this tree trunk on wooden wheels for 15 kilometers enabled me to experience. So this is definitely one of my favorite performances that I did. And this work is now in the Wits Art Museum, which I also think is nice. And one of the great things that people told me when they saw this artwork was that it made them laugh. And for me, that's an excellent compliment. And I think that's for me, when my art is effective, is if people laugh along with my art. Obviously, I don't want them to laugh at the expense of my art, but when my art allows them to laugh, that's definitely something that I appreciate. So that was Advocate of Nature, and that was one of my performances. And once again, the idea of xylophory, I'm literally carrying this wood and all of the branches that I pick up along the way. So the next work that I've got is called Rat City, designed by a committee. And once again, I'll play the video first, and then hopefully that explains something. And then I'll talk a little bit more about after the video is finished playing.
Wait, checking connection. You're on our live. Come on, followers.
Welcome to my live Instagram performance. We'll start using a number voting system. You're going to be able to tell me what you want me to do.
We have a D.
A D. Okay, so you guys are keen on the pterocarpus. Now you guys can tell me how you want me to attach this or add this to the board. And you can also select the quadrant of the board where you'd like me to start.
Okay, so choose a number and a letter.
Like a C. Very good choice. I'm proud of you guys. So think about where you would want this and let me know. And also what you want to do with it.
Combine.
So combine. All right. Now this wood was found, we were on our way to a place called Tonkwani, where we were doing some rock climbing. And as we were walking, this wood was just lying there, and it's so beautiful. And that's a completely natural shape. And this wood actually has a cousin. Unless you guys tell me not to, I'm going to do it. So this is your last chance. So we can combine this. We can maybe put I can cut a bit of a stuff away here, and we can make a hingy thing if you guys like. Let me know while I finish up here how you feel about that.
Looks like a jaw.
So should we maybe drop it on this guy's face or there by the other mouth? While I'm busy here, you can...
A lot of mouths happening.
That's also very surreal, or more like a brother, because they're... Well, yeah, non-identical twins, probably the most.
Cousin lol. Echo.
I'll just clamp it here for now, without any glue, and give you guys some time to decide if that's the right spot. Was the action here bridge? Yeah.
Epic Elephantine Observatory.
Guys, this thing I would like to cut, but I need your permission. I'm going to make that suggestion.
Okay, here's a suggestion. On your next selection, can you do a drum solo on the mulberry wood? Mark the spot of your 24th beat, and at that point, you have to do the drum solo on the mulberry wood.
Apparently it looks like a museum of mind matter.
Awesome. Instagram is all about narcissism. So at least I'm getting that right. Most of the people I know, myself included, are very much dependent on Instagram for guiding the way we make our art. Other people's comments about our work affect what we make and share. Their opinions change the images we construct of the world around us and of ourselves. Under this system, we are like rats in a cage, in which we have been conditioned by flashing lights, sounds, and little treats to stay glued to the buttons, still tapping long after the thrill has vanished. Instagram is not just a cage, but also a strange community, a metropolis. As though moving in the haunting, surreal landscapes of Giorgio de Chirico, we float through the simulated city, passing by familiar strangers, only able to recall names when they start with an ACT symbol.
It says that it feels like it needs something tall and strong in the middle to pull it together.
Okay. You want to?
Quite a few suggestions, but we can go through every.
Okay, so that's my Rat City design by committee, and I'm not sure how obvious it was. I think it was kind of obvious, but what I did is I created the system whereby viewers of my live Instagram story could, in a sort of simplified way, guide the way in which I create this artwork. So I began with just an empty board with nothing on it, and then people would first choose a piece of wood, one of 4 options, and then they would choose one of 3 verbs that I could do to that piece of wood, and then they would choose one of 4 quadrants where that wood could be placed. And the reason why I wanted to do this performance is because of how Instagram really, at least anecdotally, based on other artists that I've spoken to, if one of your paintings or one of your drawings or one of your performances gets more likes than another, people are, artists then tend to make more of the thing that has been liked or commented on social media, which is such a strange idea because for, whatever it might be, 12,000 years or 30,000 years, humans created work and artwork. And of course, artists have always responded to what their fans like or don't like. They've responded to what their patrons or their clients or their supporters like and don't like. But it was much more personal, and it was much more holistic or much more thorough or much more complete or something. That was sort of my idea, that previously your decision to make an artwork based on what the feedback you receive from others would have some degree of complexity to it. Whereas now, one of your posts has 500 likes and one of your posts has 100 likes. And based on that alone, you make more of the kind of work that had the greater number of likes, which is strange because we don't understand the algorithm which underpins or determines what other people are seeing on the Instagram, and we don't know how that person felt in the moment when they double clicked on the image and a little red heart pops up. What was their motivation for doing that? Yet often we base kind of major decisions on that. And also it was just interesting to see what kind of a limited form of communication it is. I think if I had 10 live people in my studio, what I produced would have been very different compared to when people were only able to communicate through the chat function and make a selection of various letters in a very limited way. So that was sort of the experiment or the idea underlying this artwork. And the name Rat City designed by a committee, there's a joke where people say a camel is just a horse designed by a committee. So the idea is that obviously if many people are involved and there's sort of this, whatever that kind of power dynamic is, or that form of decision making, maybe the idea is that it produces a strange or lopsided end result. And I just wanted to bring that little silly joke into the title, saying that, well, a lot of people contributed their point of view in the making of this, and so therefore if it looks bad, it's not my fault. It was designed by a committee. And then just the idea of the rat. There's a whole bunch of these social conditioning experiments where rats have to pull little levers, and then some people have drawn parallels between that and the way that social media gets us hooked to it. So I thought, well, that's a nice little title. The next artwork I'm not going to spend a lot of time on because there's less to talk about, and I think just for the point of time, I won't spend too much. Also, the audio in this next video is absolutely disgusting. So it was recorded on a GoPro, which is definitely not the right way to record audio, and nothing that really gets said is incredibly meaningful. So I'll play the video, and then while the images are playing, I'll just talk over it. Yeah, and I'll just mute it. Okay, hang on, okay, it's already muted. Cool. So this artwork, once again, the motivation behind me making it was quite simple, quite simplistic in a certain sense. In 2016, the first Starbucks ever in South Africa opened in Rosebank, and I remember reading this article where the owner of Starbucks coffee said South Africans are paying around about 12 Rand for a coffee. I don't know if you guys remember this. In 2016, a coffee used to cost more or less 12 Rand to 15 Rand. And he said, that's not on. South Africans need to be paying at least double that. So the owner of Starbucks coming to South Africa for the first time had the confidence to say, I'm going to get coffee to cost 25 to 30 Rand. And to me, that was absolutely absurd. I'd never in my life tasted Starbucks, and I wasn't happy with this idea that someone would just say, I'm going to make coffee more expensive. And the fact that he so blatantly stated that in a press release, he didn't find it to be abhorrent or that somehow it would dissuade people from attending, their franchise. In response to this, I created a walking stick, and the walking stick is able to deploy, and it opens up like a tripod, and everything on the walking stick allows you to make coffee. So there's a spoon, there's a cup of coffee grounds, there's 2 tin cups to drink from, and there's sort of a kettle and a gas stove. So it's the self-contained walking stick, which I can take anywhere, and at any point that I like, I can make coffee. And in order for me to have someone to do this performance with, I went onto this WhatsApp group where artists could share opportunities. So artists could say, who wants to be on this exhibition, or who wants to do a part-time job, who wants to get involved. And I said, I want to interview someone to take part in a performance with me. And I would like to do the interview at Starbucks. And I think I said I'd pay them, 300 Rand for their time and for their whatever their petrol costs. So this lady in the picture or in the video to the left of the image, I'd never met her in my life before. And she believed that she was meeting me at Starbucks for this interview. I guess it was probably a bit suspicious because the interview is taking place, I think, at 6 p.m. or something. And, it is for an art performance. So she probably suspected there might be something afoot. But anyway, she pitched up there, and I asked her whether she would mind that I, make her some coffee as opposed to spend, 60 Rand for the two of us to have a coffee in the Starbucks. And it was interesting because this place we were sitting smelled of urine. So I guess maybe people had been urinating there and maybe sleeping there at night. But yeah, the whole thing was, I'm going to take this coffee machine, which is highly mobile. It costs me nothing to operate. And I want to see what it would be like to share a cup of coffee with a stranger with this machine involved. So that's really the whole gist of it. And I think this person who ended up coming to the interview, she intelligent, nice person, and we had an interesting conversation. I think soon enough she realized that this was the performance. This wasn't really the interview. The performance was already happening, and we just ended up speaking for about an hour, and that was that. So that's really, I don't know, this video is probably quite boring. I had a number of cameras. I had a GoPro on my head, and my friend had a camera. So you can just see the camera on my head and sort of the setup that I've got there. At one point, a security guard wanted to chase us away, and my friend who was filming us said, do you realize everyone who walks into a Starbucks takes a selfie on their cell phone? Yet, because we've got these obtrusive cameras and we seem to be doing something weird, you want to chase us away. But Starbucks obviously loves the fact that everyone's constantly photographing the interior of the shop and marketing their product and so on. And no one from Starbucks did come outside to complain about what I was doing. So I guess, you know, I didn't really offend them or bother them in any real sense. They just left me to my own devices. But yeah, that was just something fun that I wanted to do in response to what I felt was just absurd capitalism. Yeah. So I think I'll end that over there and go on to the next slide. So the next section is Machines in the Garden, and this is a body of 5 works, and they all have to do with the frustration that I experience when I find myself wasting my precious seconds, minutes, hours, days of my life staring into this little rectangle which does nothing to edify me, does nothing to improve my relationships, it does nothing to make me more intelligent or more engaging. And one of the latest works that I did in this series is called Cell Phone Holder, and I created this little blurb: always moving, always smart, the premium cell phone holder for the discerning individual. Our stylish and lightweight accessories keep you connected with those you love, in touch with your associates, and keep your followers green with envy and wanting more. Never settle. And what this is an entire branch, which initially probably weighed about 20, 30 kilograms. And I hollowed the branch out so that I wouldn't have to carry a 20, 30 kilogram thing. And then I created this chain and this funny shoulder, whatever it's called, cup, which then allows me to carry the cell phone holder around. So in the image on the right, you can see that I've got the little cutout in the center where the phone would go. Over here, you could see on the image on the right, if you were to speak on the phone while using the cell phone holder, it's incredibly uncomfortable, impractical, heavy. It's not a good idea to have this. Here, this would be me WhatsApping or texting or scrolling Instagram while the phone is inside of the phone case. Just below my hand, you can see a little bit of a clasp which closes this trunk. And then here are just some images of the cell phone holder itself. And I don't think the message is incredibly difficult to get. It's a chain, it's a burden, it's this massive obtrusive thing. And it's just really, in a simplistic way, drawing attention to the fact that, I mean, we've all seen silly memes and things on the internet, but, people sitting around a dinner table and all of them are staring at their phones, or people at a funeral, or people at a wedding or somewhere looking at their phones, or people in a museum viewing the artworks via their device as opposed to experiencing it firsthand. And that was just, I just enjoyed making this artwork. And carrying it around and sort of making fun of sort of fashion and all of those things. And even just the name cell phone holder, I didn't feel the need to create a witty title, because a cell, a prison cell or a monastic cell, it's a place of deprivation, it's a place of restriction, it's a place of confinement, which is what I feel the cell phone does. So the name cell phone is the perfect name for the thing, because it really is this little box that keeps us restricted and limited. The next 4 works that I made will appear in these upcoming images. So in this image, we've got the selfie sword and the lignin lens. And once again, the concept isn't incredibly deep or mind-blowing. It's more about having the artwork, making the artwork, and performing with it. That's what I feel is interesting. That's what I feel is funny. So I've got this cell phone, the selfie stick, which it really telescopes. So, I engineered this wooden system so that it can fold up and telescope like a real selfie stick. And then I've got this lignin lens, which is made from a hollowed out tree trunk. And what's nice about these images, the selfie sword and the lignin lens together, I'm able to look at the phone, but I don't have to reveal my true identity. And at the same time, I'm able to record myself with a selfie stick. So it's just, I mean, you sort of get it. It's about the fact that we hide behind our anonymity online, or we curate this idealized version of ourselves online. And then, of course, me photographing myself in a very natural setting is just to contrast the very mechanical, very sterile, artificial, simulated world of social media and the internet with the beautiful natural outdoor world. So those are those 2, the lignin lens and the selfie sword. And I've just posed in a variety of ways. So that's what that is. The next one is called Prislima, and I'm about to swear, so if anyone doesn't want to hear me swear, please mute the mic. But it comes from that, once again, silly kind of saying where people say procrastination is like masturbation. It's a lot of fun while you're doing it, but in the end, you're just fucking yourself. So Prislima is the first two letters from procrastination is like masturbation. And what this artwork does is you've got the phone in this piece of wood, but there's a second piece of wood obscuring the phone. And that second piece of wood obscuring the phone has got sort of a phallic shaped protrusion on it. And the only way for you to raise the phone up, or when you raise the phone up so you can see the screen, then this phallus kind of stabs you right in the breastbone, and it really is quite painful. So the idea behind this work is very simple. The more time you spend on the phone, the more time you are screwing yourself or messing with yourself. So once again, the sort of engineering and the construction and all the different kinds of wood that I used, to me, that was really fun to make. But the idea isn't incredibly hard to grasp. It's just that I'm complaining about how much time, especially I spend on my phone. And we've got this photo session with all the cell phone towers in the back and this weird cave. And then you can just see the chest harness is able to open and then go over my body and close again. And you can just see me. And while I had this Prislima on, I also did an Instagram live where I was speaking to my followers. And every time I lifted up the phone to see what they typed or for them to see my face, I would exclaim in pain as this phallus attacked me in the chest. And then one of the last works from this body of work, it's not quite as clearly related to the cell phone, but it's called #YesFilter. And this is also more sort of just a general observation on pollution in the city. And that could include, first of all, air pollution, but also, light pollution, noise pollution, and also mental pollution that comes in the form of the internet always vying for our attention. So the Yes filter has got this wooden tube with a hinge that can open. And inside of the wooden tube, there are 5 removable smaller canisters. And then the idea is that in order to block yourself from the evil, nefarious influence of all of these various forms of pollution, you can gather herbs and fill these little canisters with herbs, and then you'll end up inhaling the sweet scent of these herbs as opposed to inhaling the toxic city air. And once again, everything's made from wood. All of the canisters, all of the hinges are made from wood, mostly that I've picked up. And so here's a sort of full image of the Yes filter. It's literally like an air filter or a gas mask that covers my face. And then there's just a series of photos where I'm wearing this Yes filter. And there's these kind of counterweights at the back that look like antenna. Some people said maybe I look like the Indian god Ganesh or something. So it's just sort of an interesting mask in that line. And then I'll just show you, this is what the works look like in the gallery. So the plinth that each work is mounted on ends up making the work as tall as I am. So this work would then be about 2.2 meters high, mounted on this plaster cast of my face and on this bust. This is Prislima mounted on a cast of my torso. This is the lignin lens with a cast of my arm, and then the selfie sword where I've got the cast of my arm as well. So that's my machines in the garden. And that was just a lovely little term. I think my partner or someone found it in a book. And it's just this little poetic term. I don't really know what it means besides that, humans, and we've got this natural world where these organic beings full of bacteria, and we sweat and cry and bleed, and we eat and we fart and all sorts of things. But then we've also got this mediated digital fantasy that we live in, and we try and disown our biological nature, maybe something along those lines. And then the last piece that I'm working on currently as well is called elemental inoculation, because the client is I think they're the biggest manufacturer of vaccines for animals, for livestock in South Africa. And the only brief that I got from the client was they want a large sort of panel-based artwork, because I made these small books out of wood, and essentially that concept of these little wooden frames, they just wanted that on a large scale. And they invited me into their laboratory at the CSIR, and they said, come tour our laboratory, and then based on what you see, you then propose what you'd like to create. This is the sketch of what I proposed to create. And in the laboratory, the thing that was most evident to me was this idea of they've got these rooms with a positive air pressure. So air is always flowing out of the room. And that's a certain kind of, it maintains a certain type of sterility or, hygiene in that room. Then there are rooms with negative air pressure. So air is always being sucked into the room. And that's, of course, if those rooms contain viruses that can infect humans, you don't want any air leaking out of that room. They've also got these air cabinets. They've got Bunsen burners. So there's these, gas flames and electric elements and these bioreactors where they're heating up this, medium that the viral cells grow in. And they've got all these pipes full of water and water purification. So what came to mind was this idea, the classical idea, the Western idea of the 4 elements. So you've got fire, air, water, and earth. And if you think of the Greek physician Galen, who is sometimes called the father of, medicine, although, that's to be debated. Galen really based his theories on these 4 humors. So you had yellow bile, phlegm, blood, and black bile. Those 4 humors in your bodies determined how your body worked. And then also Plato had the idea of the 4, or actually 5 elements. And there were these Platonic shapes, which were associated with each of the 5 elements. So the first panel, which represents fire, that's total chaos. It's harmful, it's unpredictable, it's dangerous. That's when the animal is infected with the virus. The second, and that's made up of 4 triangles, because if you fold them together, you get a little tetrahedron. The second panel represents air, which is associated with blood, and that's made up of the octahedron, the 8 triangles that fold together. The next panel is the dodecahedron, 20 triangles. That's associated with phlegm and water. And then the last panel is the cube, which is associated with earth. So that basically informed my design. And here's just a little small scale maquette that I made to show the client what I'm sort of proposing. And this was part of the brief that I showed them. So I had sort of these little tasters, these little flavors of the kind of work I'd made in the past, hoping that they would be able to envision this work in its final stage and actually give me the go-ahead, which they did. Here are just, my computer was stolen last year, so I had to get these images off of Instagram because they were stolen with my computer. But in the left-hand panel, you can see the tetrahedron in front, and then behind it, the octahedron, the dodecahedron, and the cube. And then just also, it's interesting, the wood that I used for the first panel was wood from a fever tree, which is excellent because the first panel, fire, has to do with fever. And the fever tree was actually killed by a fungus. And then once the fungus killed the tree, it was infested by these borer beetles. So it was kind of interesting, relevant for me. Fever tree also happens to be yellow. Fire is associated with the color yellow. It's associated with yellow bile. So that was just very sort of poetic. Here's an image of the first 3 panels completed. So I still have one more panel and then some sort of background ephemera to complete. So that's that. Here you can kind of see, as a scale reference, I'm about 2 meters tall. So each panel is about 2 meters tall, and the whole artwork is 6 meters wide. And here's just a different view where it can kind of fold. And this is one of the panels that I like most of all, which is that first panel, which has to do with fire, with inflammation, and with the color yellow and so on. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see this kind of protein shape. If you've ever seen artists' renditions of what protein looks like when it's all folded and so on, all of that's carved out of wood. There's no material on here except for wood. So this thing is able to articulate and move back and forth. So it kind of looks like a living, flexible protein. And that's all made from wood. And then on the back, you can see the fever tree, the sort of organic shape of the branches. I wasn't using planks that had been, run through a industrial process and cured according to, industrial techniques. These were just raw branches from a tree, which died, that I was then able to use in the artwork. Here's a close-up of that kind of protein shape. Here's another close-up of the protein shape and some details of some of the joinery that I did. Here's some more details of the joinery and the hinges. We've got some more hinges. And I think that's the last slide. Fantastic. So I'm quite happy. I've kept it to exactly just under an hour. So I hope I didn't rush through this last part too quickly. But that's the end of what I have to share. So I think the timing is more or less good. So we can probably go over to questions now.
Yes, thank you, Ellen. Timing is absolutely perfect. It was so lovely to see the Preslima work pop up, because that was on the alumni exhibition, and it's quite. I love how you use playfulness and humor in a very satirical way to make comments about the everyday things, but also the things that surround the artist. That's part of the art world, which is not always, one doesn't always find ways to address it in a way that's truly creative. And nice comments on hegemonic masculinity and so on as well. It gives a new meaning to carrying wood.
Yeah.
Oh, so if anyone would like to comment or to say hi to Ellen or to ask a question, please do just put it in the chat, but we'd love you to just pop up onto the screen.
Also, maybe if there's any particular slide that anyone would like me to return to, because I think I did rush through the last bit quite quickly. I can also go back if there's anything someone would like to see in more detail. I think Philippa has a hand up.
Oh, yes. Really just to compliment you and say how intriguing and enchanting your work is, which is not to imply that it's lightweight. I think what I like about your work is that dual play between, on the one hand, a kind of whimsy, and on the other hand, a kind of cutting relevance. So I enjoyed that, and I enjoyed it that your work traverses all that geography, not just the small space of the studio.
Thank you.
I don't have anything more intellectual to say than that, just that I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I don't know whose hand is next. Paul?
Well, it's actually Brenda on Paul's computer.
Oh. Hi, Brenda.
Yeah. Lovely presentation. Thank you, Ellen. It was fantastic.
Thanks.
I really agree with the perceptions that have been made, but I wanted to add another one that I like so much. And that's the sort of play. You spoke about a play between the natural world and the digital. What I love is this play, almost in time, between an archaic, prehistoric moment. These objects look in a way as something prehistoric, and the play between that and absolute sort of contemporary practices. I just wondered if you wanted to say any bit about those sort of archaic illusions.
Absolutely. So, sorry. So in my master's, I had this character called Mr. Neanderthalensis, which is once again quite a direct reference to this idea of being prehistoric, pre-industrial, pre-agricultural, whatever the case may be. And that's definitely something that I do appreciate. It's naturally naive and nostalgic and maybe a bit kitsch to imagine that the past was, perfect, because obviously there was no healthcare, there was no food security, there was no modern conveniences. But I do think that, humans being animals, we've definitely separated ourselves from our animal nature, and I think maybe a bit too much. So I definitely appreciate your comment that there's this sense of prehistoric aesthetic to it, because I love nature. I love spending time in nature with as few modern conveniences as possible. And I do like the fact that it comes through in my work. And also the fact that our ancestors would have produced technologies and important tools from wood. And I'm able to do what they were able to do. It's something that keeps me grounded to that other time. At the same time, of course, I love the convenience of all the technology, Uber Eats and, driving around and so on. So there is that play between the two times, so to speak. Thanks, Brenda. Gordon?
Hi, Alan. Great
Hi.
to hear you again, and yeah, and to spend time with your work. I've always appreciated the kind of humor that comes into your work, and it takes me back to when I was a student at Wits, and I was trying to make work that involved humor. I wanted to write about Brett Murray and people like that, and Eugene Hahn and Delis Reich, and I was patently told that humor was not a laughing matter, and that humor had no place in art within South Africa. And I'm very happy to see that nearly 40 years later, humor now has a very, very important role to play, and you're taking that forward in the next for the next generation as such. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks.
And then also the thing that I really, really enjoy about your work, and whenever I bring people through my studio and show them the little toilet piece I bought from you, is the beautiful craftsmanship. Where a lot of these things are put together in a way that there's not a single nail or a screw. It's all dowel sticks and little handmade dowels, and everything works and functions and doesn't fall apart. So that's something else that I really, really enjoy. So thanks so much for that.
Thanks, Gordon. Yeah, I hope it doesn't fall apart in the future. I think that's one of the reasons why I was happy to be given the opportunity to create this bigger artwork, because the artwork that Gordon is talking about is small, and wood isn't really happy at that very small scale necessarily. I think wood is more, happier at the scale of furniture. So hopefully my craftsmanship is going to stand the test of time, but I think it will. David?
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks so much. I'm taken back to your preface in your master's, where you speak about the impossibility of living in and making sense of a contemporary world. And I'm reminded of two things. The first is something that I observed last week at Micah Bucker's presentation, and said that I think that if Gordon's and my recent conversations are anything to go by, we are going to have to introduce a module, a compulsory module for all first-year visual arts students in absurdity. And if we do that, and Gordon, I think you might agree that this is becoming more and more of a priority in contemporary visual art training, because absurdity seems to be an ABC. If you don't understand essential absurdity of life, it's going to be quite difficult to make relevant art. And I was wondering if we ever do. I think we need to bring you in as chief lecturer in that module. And Philippa, it's great to see you. And I was just thinking that there seems to be a wonderful line between the work of Willem Boshoff and Russell's work and Alan's work,
Yes,
keeping the tradition of crafting wood and crafting absurdity through wood alive in today's world.
And movement as well. I don't know if you remember that sculpture of Russell's. He called it Stump Sails, and he wheeled it through Doornfontein. It's now in the Kimberley Art Gallery.
Sure.
You're right,
to see
David.
that.
Yeah, lots of photos.
What was the artist's name? Sorry, please.
Willem Boshoff.
Yeah.
Russell Scott.
Russell Scott. Is he the one who did the wheeled thing? Or...
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I remember I also saw Tracy Rose did a fantastic similar kind of, well, it was superficially similar. It was conceptually very different, but she was on a residency in, sorry, I'm just going to write down the name Russell Scott before I forget it. And so Tracy
my
Rose.
Husband.
Oh, okay, excellent. I'd love to look at that. She walked through, I think it was in Antwerp, and she had this trolley, and there was a tree with like weeds and things in the trolley, but then she sort of painted herself all sorts of psychedelic colors, and she had a traffic cone, and she shouted Patrice Lumumba, until she went horse. So obviously politically, conceptually, hers was different, but she also had a little trolley with wheels with these plants in it. So it's something that humans want to do. We want to pull around a trolley.
Perambulated with your work. Yeah.
Alan, do you want to say
sorry.
do you want to say anything more about the role of absurdity as a direct prompt to your art making?
Yeah, I mean, just also when you're speaking about the sort of next generation and absurdity, I think if they're called Gen Z or whatever, those people who are now 20 years old, if one looks at meme culture, the internet has this sort of inherent absurdity. I don't know if everyone looks at the same kind of things on the internet that I do, but certain YouTube channels and certain memes are fully embracing of absurdity, and I think a lot of people who aren't from that generation, including me most likely, don't understand what's being done, because I don't think there is any meaning. There's no intent to put meaning in those works. But I think that absurdity, I mean, I've always loved Monty Python and, that genre of absurdist comedy and sort of absurdist surreal art. I've always loved Dada and Fluxus and all of those different movements who dealt with absurdity, because I think that's a very, very unfettered form of creativity. Nothing is prohibited. Nothing can't be done, because by its definition, absurdity is free. In a similar vein, I mean, Walter Battis's Fook Island. So I definitely think absurdity is important, and it's also, without it, if you know what all the pre-existing limits or barriers or rules are, then you're very unlikely to surprise yourself. Whereas if you allow yourself to indulge in absurdity, something truly novel could emerge. Yeah. Awesome. And I don't know if Danica has a hand up.
Hi, Alan. How's it going?
Hi. Good evening.
Good. It's so lovely to see a collection of all your work together. And I think you already actually touched on this, but what I've always liked about your work is the functionality of it, being functional artworks, but also that dysfunction or unfunction, that, it supposedly has a function, but you can't really use it for what it's made, or it actually makes it absurd. And I think that touch on the absurdity that you've all mentioned also, but yeah, I think that's a wonderful quality and something that I really like.
So actually, Danica, you just reminded me of something that I didn't mention when I spoke about the cell phone holder. So I don't know if it's visible, but I've got this notebook which has a pen, and you can kind of see there's like this glue remnant, because what I actually glued my cell phone to this book for some time with the idea that instead of browsing my cell phone, I should write down what I'm going to do in my cell phone, and then use my cell phone, and then double check whether I've stuck to my intention. I also built a much smaller wooden cell phone holder with a belt clip, and then I also screwed my cell phone into that with the idea that having this big bulky cell phone holder would prevent me from doom scrolling thoughtlessly, because I would be more aware of holding it. But as you can see, I've removed my cell phone from the notebook, and I no longer have the wooden case, because as Danica said, my things have this purported function, but inevitably the function fails. So after creating 5 works about how I don't want to be addicted to my phone, I'm no less addicted to my phone at the end of it. After creating an artwork about how Instagram potentially manipulates us as artists and changes the way we make art, I still have Instagram. So I kind of revel in the failure of my own artworks. And that's why I said it's meditations on xylophory. It's more about being present with the wood than necessarily achieving something with the wood. Yeah. Awesome. I don't know if there's any more questions or.
I have a question actually, Alan. Kind of building on everything that has gone before, I wanted to highlight how I loved your foregrounding of the concept of your performed artworks. And while your works are so very contemporary, in some ways you could see them as being in the tradition of art objects made on the African continent, where they do not exist in and of themselves as objects fixed in time and space, but they need to be, they're ritualized, they're performed, they're giving context through the, you know, the engagement with the community, with people, with the artist who activates them. So I wondered if that was ever something that was, you know, figured in your self-conception.
I'm so happy you actually brought that up. I didn't mention it. So I love that idea. So the mask isn't this precious thing that you're going to put behind a piece of glass in the museum and, you know, sell at Sotheby's for, you know, 30 billion rand in the future. It's not this thing that needs to be maintained at, you know, the absolute humidity and temperature and whatever control. It's something that you put on, you sweat in it, you bleed in it, you cry in it. It might fall, get covered in dust. Everyone's around you to see you use this object that has meaning within the community. So not at all, my work doesn't approach that level of awesome utility in a communal sense, but I'm very much inspired by that I think most of my wooden artworks do have a tiny bit of my blood, sweat and tears in them to a greater or lesser extent. And I even read about certain sacrificial objects where this beautiful patina would accrue, where people would pour sacrificial blood on the artwork, and the artwork would become totally obscured under this crust of sacrificial blood, and that increases the potency of the artwork. So everything you've just said, Irene, I love that about the African approach to art objects compared with the Western museum sort of dead historical approach. Yeah.
I had just one final question. I'd like us to go to the chat briefly before we conclude. But out of interest, Alan, how did you come to joinery and, you know, the degree of craftsmanship and working with wood in a practical level? Did you take classes? Did you watch Instagram videos? How did you start working with wood, and then how did you progress?
So my beginning to work with wood came from the fact that it was free and I could just pick it up and use it. So I realized joining metal, you need a welder and you need welding rods, and metal normally isn't free. Casting bronze is incredibly expensive, but wood is lying around and it's super beautiful. So when I started working with wood, I had absolutely no clue how to join it. And then as I continued working, a lot of it was trial and error. A lot of it was, in a sense, almost deducing what seemed sensible, but definitely I double checked my deductions, and I learned new techniques from Instagram and from YouTube. I was briefly a member of the Woodworkers Association of Pretoria, so I did definitely pick up a couple of tips, and then, you know, my friends have also maybe contributed a couple of tips. So there's no single source. It's very much a collected, assembled experience. Yeah.
Last chance, last call, everyone, for questions. Alan, I don't know if you can see, there've just some comments by Hazel and Kim Berman in the chat complimenting you, enjoying your latest work.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks, Kim and Hazel. It's nice to hear.
Thank you, Alan. So fantastic to see. I think we all really enjoy what has been said. I mean, I concur, and I still so love your work you did for your master show in the library, and that relationship with the context, and the way your work is so context specific. And in the central Johannesburg library was such a fantastic site for it, that I still feel that was a performance piece in itself. And very remarkable. So where are all those pieces? Have they all found homes? And what do you do with all your work that isn't in homes?
So some of it is in collections, for which I'm, you know, very happy, but then a lot of it is either in my studio still, or in my garage at home, or in my storage unit. So the majority of my and my partner's life is just taken up by all of our sculptures and paintings that we still have. So yeah, I do have a lot of them still in storage, because it's kind of difficult to sell wooden artworks, people do gravitate towards bronze sculpture because it's more reliable in a sense.
Well, thank you again, and great to see you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Kim. And thank you also, Kanya, for the, I mean, I'm definitely inspired by African masks. I think African mask making is exceptional, and it's a huge inspiration to me. Yeah.
Alan, just want to say thanks to yourself and all the other people who took part in the exhibition. It was a fabulous show, and thanks, yeah, to all the Dignitas and the award winners as well. We look forward to the rest of the thing, and thanks Irene and Brenda for putting this all together. It's been a great series, and still another 15 million to go, I think.
Yeah, thanks to everyone. And just to answer David's question, I'm not in regular contact with Professor Etterforsker, but I do still think of him and tell people about him every now and then. And yeah, I should maybe hear how he's doing. See if I can get into a seance and connect with him again.
Well, Alan, I hope that when you do establish contact with him or any other avatars that may arrive for you in the next phase, and I hope that we will hear from you again, perhaps when you've completed the elemental inoculation work. I think we'd all like to see how it turns out in the flesh.
Thanks so much.
So thank you, everybody, and a very big thank you to Alan from all of us here at the SARChI Chair and at the Department of Visual Art. I think we'll let everybody go off to have their supper. And yes, enjoy your evening. Thank you again, everyone.
Awesome. Great evening to everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Brenda. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Alan. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.